You Sandcast guys, here's an early one. These were called mules. And there were a number of these bikes around. We never rode on these. Other tests were being conducted at various places. Testing on like a drag strip situation. That was called the Arakawa test strip. And it was a straight line with a dog bone at one end and at the other. So it looked like a gigantic dog bone. It was, I believe, about a mile long, and you would accelerate as hard as you could. You would not dethrottle, you would leave the throttle, and you would squeeze the clutch so the engine would go nuts, and then pop the throttle, and you would go to 100 miles an hour, and then use only the front brake to stop. And then you would shift back down into first gear, and you do it again and turn around at the dog bone, and do that back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back. And I think Bob Young and I did this, and we were involved in a day's worth, which was a half a day's more than we really needed. And you got to the point where you could modulate the front brake. We were not doing stoppies, but you could make the front tire kind of moan a little bit. And the whole idea was to do is hard testing on the transmission, the drive system, the front brake system, those things that were really new with this motorcycle. But the Japanese test riders had been doing that and continued doing it after Bob and I went on our merry way to do something else. They had a chain failure that went into the crankcase, so this engine came apart. I don't think anybody's ever heard of that phenomena, but it did happen over there. And this engine was taken apart, and contrary to popular opinion, it was probably taken apart on the floor, and the engine and the chassis were all torn apart. Engine was set up on a table in a little thing the size of a two-car garage. And there was a mob scene of mechanics, technicians around there working on the engine. There were men who were assigned or vying for the right to do the parts books. And they just had notepads and lead pencils with teeny tiny lead. I couldn't say ABC without breaking the lead up. And they're drawing from these parts laid out on this table. They're sketching like crazy. And when you looked at what they drew, you could not believe that a human being could, no sketching in, no scribbling, just there's a piston. Well, I'm a half-assed artist, or I would like to think I am. And when I got over there and saw those guys, I thought, no, they really were amazing. And they were competing. The person who made the best presentation with their work was going to get the job to do the Honda parts books for the new 750. These are not broken cases. These are new cases that were being used to rebuild the engine. They always had maybe, 2 or 3 engines that they were dyno testing on a dynamometer, and they had maybe 4 bikes in the late pre-production stage, prototype bikes, and then they had the white mules. So they were always beating the stew out of these things one way or another. This is just more stuff. When we got to Saitama in February, early February of 1969, the engine plant in Saitama was making S600 and 800 sport car engines, a little double overhead cam engine. And when we came there, they had already hung a big visqueen plastic from the ceiling to the floor and protected and separated the car engine thing from what was going to be the new CB750 assembly line, engine assembly line. And they had no crankshaft grinding department. They had never ground crankshafts because everything was made with ball bearings and crank pins and pressed together and bolted together. Well, now they're going to grind an automotive type crankshaft, and they're going to use bearing inserts. And they had purchased a number of years before these, I think Sweden or Switzerland, the crankshaft grinding equipment, and they were big things, big things. My idea of a grinder is you stand with your belly up to the bench and you go arm on this 6-inch or 8-inch wheel. Well, anyhow, we left and went about our business, which included working on the owner's manual and this and that and testing. And probably in a week we came back, they had cut holes in the cement floor, big holes in the cement, thick cement floor. They had implanted these crankshaft grinding machines, everything up, running, grinding crankshafts, like hope pump. What are we going to do next week? No biggie. Enthusiasm and something else. They had 2 major snowstorms while we were there. Both set records. One was 13 inches, and I don't know whether this might have been 9, but they just deal with it and have a whole lot of fun. They make snowmen. Lots of inspections after these engines would be taken down. They would measure everything and double check everything. And one of the problems was the little biscuits that they used in the secondary clutch basket were disintegrating or crumbling or deforming through this acceleration type testing. So Mr. Oguma, we were there one evening pretty late, he gets an idea, so he takes a test setup and he drills some holes and he puts some pins in the milling machine, and the pins and the oblong holes were to allow the cushion system to work to a point, and then the pins were to have stopped any further compression and deformation of those little rubber biscuits. And that went into production. No drawings, no messing around. He just did it. He was a technician. You think this is going to work? We're going to try. They had established a deadline of March 15th to make the first production 750. This is again more testing in the lab, checking things out. That's a Juno scooter. It was made by Honda. They shipped 1 or more of these to American Honda in California, and American Honda thought it was a unique scooter. It had some kind of incredible transmission or drive system, but they said it was going to be too expensive to sell and compete in the scooter market. That's Bob Young on the right. Oguma's wife, she was a model in Japan, and Oguma on the left. And Oguma he wore turtlenecks. When you worked at Honda, when you worked at Honda Motor Company, you did not wear a turtleneck. You always wore a little green cap in the shop. You always wore the white jacket. Oguma. Honda had service factories, and these were established by Honda Motor, and you could take your car to them. They had them for motorcycles scattered around Japan, where you could get wonderful things done just like going to a Honda car dealer, because most of the sales outlets in Japan were tiny little places. I mean, tiny little places. And they'd have a N600 or something, or N360, and there'd be stuff piled all over the top, and you walk in the door, and the owner would be embarrassed. He'd run and pull all the junk that's laying on the car and dust it all up. It's a different world.